Welcome. We're David and Hillary, and this is our movie POSTview of the movie Brave the Dark. If this is the first movie review that you've watched of ours, we do a preview and a POSTview of each movie. The preview is no spoilers, but we kind of give you an idea if you're going to want to watch that movie or not. And the POSTview, we talk about everything. So,
all the spoilers.
Yeah, so if you have not seen Brave the Dark and you don't want spoilers, close this out. And on our channel, you can find the David and Hillary Show channel on YouTube. You can find Brave the Dark movie preview, and that's the one you want. But we welcome you, and Brave the Dark. We really liked it. We actually liked it quite a bit. Hillary, what did you think?
I loved it. I think on the preview I said, go see this movie.
Yep.
It's from Angel Studios. We mentioned before, kind of a low budget, $200,000. But here's the thing. If I go to a movie and it has a lower budget, and a lot of Christian movies are going to have a lower budget.
Yep.
And I grade on a curve for that, right? If you've got millions and millions of dollars in your movie, I expect a certain level of movie making. And if you've only got 200,000, I'm going to give you a little bit of a break. I thought they did such a great job. It's set in the 80s. I was set in the 80s. Right. And so here's the thing. Anytime you've got a movie where you know what the period should look like, they need to get it correct. Yeah. Clothes, hair. So many times I think on the 80s movies too, they overdo it. They almost like make a caricature of it.
Yeah.
And this was not that. I was like, dude, the guy's filming in my high school. This is so great.
Yeah.
I think I had that shirt. Yeah, I thought they did a great job.
It was good. I mean, you talk about the budget, but the story was captivating. The script was really well done. We both thought the acting was good.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw somebody complain about Nate's character online.
I was just going to mention that. Yeah. Before we go see a movie, we do very, very minimal research.
Right.
We'll watch the trailer. We want to make sure there's nothing that we would find offensive where we're just like, yeah, we don't even really want to go see that movie. And that, of course, was not the case with this. But after we do read other people's reviews and kind of compare and contrast to what we thought, maybe that's what you're doing right now watching us. I don't know. But somebody said they thought the actor that played Nate was really unconvincing. He was kind of stoic and didn't show a lot of emotion.
Yeah.
And I'm like, are you not aware that there are thousands of different personality types?
Yeah.
And, if
the dude had been through some trauma.
Well, if you even get 100 people and put them through the same exact life stuff, they're all going to react a little differently. Some of them may be similar, but nobody responds to things exactly the same way. And I say this a lot. I want to like your movie. I'm going to do my best to follow what you're giving me as long as it makes sense. And I thought the acting was pretty consistent throughout and pretty believable. I could see like a person with that personality would respond in that way.
Yeah.
So
I thought it was very consistent and believable to me. Mr. Dean's character, the character Mr. Dean, I loved him.
Yeah.
I just, I'm thinking, did everybody have a teacher like that? That one teacher that cared about everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody knew their name. You see them around town. You're like, oh, there's my teacher so-and-so. They actually loved their students.
Right.
I think you had one like that.
Yep, I did.
Yeah. And so they're super special. So that's Mr. Dean. And you love him in this movie. And you're just thankful that there's teachers like that out there.
Yeah. Well, I thought the contrast between Mr. Dean, I think this would be the case in any situation like that. You don't really know what you're getting yourself into.
Right. He
wanted to help. He said, yeah, I'm gonna help. I'm gonna put myself out there. At first, he was like, you can stay at my house overnight, but not forever. And then it was like, it became a couple, 3-4 nights. And then and then Nate would make another bad decision. And he's like, come on, dude, what are you doing? But nobody really truly knew Nate's backstory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like he'd somehow gotten into the foster system, and then he ends up at this high school, but nobody really knows. I mean, Nate doesn't really even know his backstory, which is
not fully, no.
Right. Because
he lived it, but the things that that happened when he was really little, you know.
Well, and let's, I think I do kind of want to jump to that because we're doing all the spoilers. So, so we find out little by little in the movie what has happened to Nate, and that he has witnessed his mom being murdered by his father.
Right.
And that his father has committed suicide right in front of him.
Right after that.
Right after that. But what we don't find out until the very end is that right before all of that happens, Nate asks his dad, who's coming, to the property to hurt the mom. She's left him. She's trying to get restraining orders on him. He's very abusive.
Yep.
And he is basically here to murder her. And right before that happens, Nate asks his dad, was it Blake? Is Blake going to be my new daddy?
Yeah. Such an innocent question, but such a horrible time. Like the kid doesn't know. How old do you think he was in that scene?
I mean, 4?
Yeah.
4. And all he knows is that dad was mean, had to go away.
Yeah.
But there's this new guy who's super nice, loves his mom.
Right.
And he's just asking a question. Is Blake going to be my new daddy?
Yeah.
So
like the worst possible thing
right.
to set off an already crazy person that's
right.
that's violent and everything else. But at 4, you don't know that. You're just trying to figure out what in the world is happening.
Well, you don't know that was not your fault. He blames himself.
Right.
He thinks that he caused his dad to do that.
Yeah.
No. Dad was sitting in that car all night long, had the shotgun ready to go.
Yeah.
He was just waiting for the opportunity.
Yeah.
So, but as a child, you don't know that. And then tell him what happens with Grandma and Grandpa after all that.
Well, yeah, I mean, multiple things, but Grandma and Grandpa were not crazy, but they were just not well equipped.
Yeah.
For children or grandchildren. They were, I think they try to subtly show that Grandma and Grandpa were religious, but maybe super strict religious, maybe very legalistic, maybe not having a really great grasp on how to lovingly care for children and grandchildren. And so that was just sad to watch. The people that were still alive and could have been there for Nate weren't.
Yeah.
And then even later when Mr. Dean convinces them to bail him out and to take him back in, they handle that horribly as well.
Yeah, it's really hard to watch, especially since all of this is based on a true story.
Yep.
You just want so badly for somebody to step in and love this boy, and he just keeps having hard situation after hard situation.
Yeah.
But I do love his journey, and I forgot something about Mr. Dean. Mr. Dean is trying to get over the death of his mom, right? Mom has passed away recently.
Yep.
And she'd been living with him. He'd been caring for her. And one of his friends keeps trying to talk to him about, you probably need to take that back. You need some of her equipment. Like it was like a walker or a wheelchair. He just didn't want to get rid of any of her things.
Yeah.
And I love the moment where Mr. Dean realizes Nate needs a more permanent place to stay, and he cleans out Mom's room, and I'm gonna cry. He makes room for Nate to actually have a bedroom.
Yep.
And he's willing to let go of some of his past to help Nate come into his home and make room in his heart for him to be part of the family. So.
Yeah, and they didn't really milk it in the movie, but you can just kind of see in that moment when Mr. Dean walks out and Nate looks around and realizes that, he's 17 or whatever.
Yeah.
It's the first time in his entire life that he's had his own bedroom.
Yeah. Yeah. And even though it's like, it's set in the 80s, but Mr. Dean is older, and so it's like an old fashioned grandma room.
It's decorated from like the mid 70s.
Yeah. But you're right. Like Nate looks around and he's like, this is mine.
It's my space.
And it's really powerful in a very subtle way, right? It's beautiful. So I loved that. We love you, Mr. Dean. and all the teachers like that. All the beautiful teachers that step into people's lives and really try to love these kids. I loved when Nate felt safe enough to go find the truth at the library. Was it library he went?
Yeah, he went to the library and looked at the microfilm or microfiche or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's some determination.
Yeah.
Like you can't just Google through your microfiche.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it took him a while to find it.
Yeah.
He must have known roughly when it happened, but not exactly when it happened.
Yeah.
And I'm old enough that I looked for stuff on those machines before, and it is not easy.
Yeah.
It is not efficient at all.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he just kept going back until he found it and confirmed that his memory was true, and that his grandparents were forbidding him to say what really happened
Yeah.
to his mom. And they told everyone that it happened in a car accident, which was a complete fabrication.
Right. Yeah.
It's crazy.
So Nate's, itty bitty, and he's trying to tell the truth. Grandparents are like, no, he's just making stories. That's not real. And so because of that, he can't even talk. He goes to the orphanage, and it's like you said before, he had nothing to say.
Yeah.
Because every time he tried to say what he knew to be the truth, people called him a liar.
Yeah, they told him not to say it.
Yeah, don't talk about that. So yeah, lots of bad counseling decisions going on here.
Well, it wasn't even counseling. I mean, I know what you're saying.
From Grandma and Grandpa. Yeah.
Well, and then other people too. Like it was not as common for people to get good counseling back then. It was kind of just that attitude of suck it up and make better choices and make something of your life.
Yeah.
And we're not going to actually, they thought talking, and I'm not saying universally across society, but especially in places where they didn't have a lot of funding to bring in counselors or whatever, they just thought talking about it's going to make it worse. Let's just move on. We'll put that in the past and let's just forget that. Okay. And let's just move forward. And by the way, do better, it's kind of fairly unsympathetic approach to life, which at some points in life, you kind of need to suck it up and just go do what you got to do. But for that situation and for no one to really be compassionate enough to find out the truth or try to help him through it until Mr. Dean, until he was most of the way through high school.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
And there's so much power in telling the truth.
Yeah.
There's so much when you can deal with things you know about. You can't deal with things that you don't know.
Yeah.
Can I share one of my favorite parts? Oh, actually.
Well,
sorry. What I interrupted. What were you going to say?
No, I mean, there was one thing I specifically wanted to say before we go on and talk about, I don't know exactly where you're going, but.
Yeah. And I forgot something else I wanted to say too from the beginning.
Well, so we've been kind of talking about all of this, Nate making bad decisions and then finding out more about his childhood. And it makes me think of a quote that I thought came from Mr. Rogers. That's where I heard it. It was in his book, The World According to Mr. Rogers, Important Things to Remember. But the quote is, there isn't anyone you couldn't love once you've heard their story. And my throat today, it just makes me think of the movie where the more you learn, the more you learn, the more you learn. At first you're like, dude, this Nate character, he's making so many bad choices.
Yeah.
And I even found myself going, well, when I was in high school, if a girl's father and then the girl herself said, leave me alone, I don't have anything to do with my daughter, and that would be heartbreaking. And I did have girls break up with me and had to deal with all of that. But you don't just say, no, screw it, I'm not giving. I mean, he was in trouble for so many things, and then the dad comes and confronts him, and then the daughter, the former girlfriend says, you got to leave me alone. And then he's like, you just know that's gonna cause so much trouble. And I'm watching the movie going, well, you got to get it, son. You got to figure some of this stuff out. But the more you learn about his past, you I don't know, I'm kind of a literal thinker. And so when you say there's no one you couldn't love if you knew their full story, I don't know if that's really true. But I do think when you find out how jacked up some people's backstories are, you at least have more compassion.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
And that definitely was true of this movie. Just for the record, Mr. Rogers attributed that quote to Benedictine nun, Sister Mary Lou Kanowski. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but I want to give her credit for the quote. There isn't anyone you couldn't love once you heard their story. That really made me think of that, this whole movie.
Yeah. No, it was really good. I forgot when we were talking about the 80s. I think I mentioned I really thought they did a great job on the clothes.
Yep.
The cars seemed pretty accurate. The music, when I first heard the music, I thought, okay, wow, this sounds like 80s music, but I don't recognize this music. So I think what they did was they actually wrote music for the movie to sound like 80s music, but probably didn't have the budget to put the real music in there.
Yeah, I need to investigate how that works, but someone told me once, someone in the music industry here in Nashville told me, you don't need someone's permission to put their song in your movie, but you do have to pay them royalties.
Okay.
If you don't pay the royalties, then you get in trouble. So I don't know what that costs, but on a movie with such a low budget, It was probably easier to fake the 80s music than to play actual music from that time period.
So one of the things that I kind of look for in a movie is once you dive in and you're in it, as long as they keep everything period correct, music, clothes, conversation, once they do something that is not period correct, it kind of shocks you out again.
Yeah.
And for me, that was the fire pit. Hello. So there's a party scene at the house, and that actually seemed pretty accurate, although I didn't get invited to a lot of parties. But that's okay. I've heard about them.
You're not bitter about it.
No, I'm not bitter. About the girls that broke up with you.
Yeah.
I didn't have any parties.
Yeah.
But the fire pit was on the patio. It was like a stone patio. And it was like one that you would get at Walmart today.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, we didn't have those. I'm sure that nobody I knew had a fire pit like that. You would build a fire out in the backyard, in the grass, maybe stone or rock or cement block.
Cinder blocks, maybe.
Cinder blocks. That's where you had a fire pit, and you made them.
Yeah, but you didn't go to the store and buy a fire pit that you can pick up and move around, which was what was in the movie.
Right.
I never saw that in that era of the history of the world.
Yeah.
Until probably into I don't want to say, but this seemed out of place.
Yeah, it was the only thing that actually kind of jarred me back to 2025. I was like, oh no, we didn't have those.
Right.
So that's all right.
If you know when movable fire pits came on the scene, feel free to put that in the comments. I'd like to know.
I'm guessing 2000.
I was going to say in the 2000s.
2006.
I would say not before the year 2000, but I can't prove that. And at least widely to where it was a common thing that a lot of people had.
Yeah.
So
that was a little thing, but
well, we might as well I had a couple things too that I like the movie a lot. I don't want to talk bad about it, but this is part of what we do. We like to break it down. So I ran 4 years of track in high school, and I also ran in junior high. And when one of the early scenes in the movie, Nate's practicing by himself. I won't say warming up, but practicing by himself, and he's running backwards on the track. If you've ever been to a track meet, you don't run clockwise around the track. You run counterclockwise around the track. Don't ask me why. I have no idea. But that's what, races are always run counterclockwise around the track. And every track practice that I ever went to where we did workouts on the track, I did middle distance, and we would just run through the neighborhoods and try to build up our endurance and other things. But then we would come back on the track and do sprints and try and build up endurance that way too. Anyway, nobody cares about my track experience, but
I'm listening.
So maybe people go and run backwards around the track sometimes, but I'm just saying, when you're a low budget film and you're an emerging studio, and one of the first scenes in the movie is you have a guy who runs track and he's on the track working out, make him go the right way around the track. It's just distracting.
Well, because they ran the race the correct way.
They ran the race the correct way.
Yeah.
But it just stood out. I'm like, okay, do you know about track? It just was distracting to me. It made me feel like these people don't know what they're doing.
And that wouldn't have stood out to me because I didn't run track.
Right. Not everybody's going to notice it, but I noticed it. And then
everybody's got a fire pit though. I'm just kidding. I don't know. It's like a water buffalo.
Well, they also showed him racing in a 200-meter race. They didn't call it that, but I think that's what it was. And he won the race. So the other thing that was a little unrealistic about that was that the white kid won a sprint, which doesn't never happen. I've seen some really fast white kids. That could happen. But also they're telling the story about how he's living out of his car. He's not getting good rest. He's not eating for 3 days at a time.
Right.
So if you're going to convince me that the white kid went out and won the 200-meter race against other kids that normally would win that race, you kind of lost me at he's got everything stacked against him and he's still genetically good enough to do that. And he's white. I'm sorry. Reality check. Anyway, there was one other thing that I wanted to address. I think I mentioned this already on this POSTview, but I was looking at other people's comments after we saw the movie, not before. And somebody said, how is he the kid from foster care that has, no resources, but he has the best car in school? And I thought, that's funny. That had to be a young person who said that, because in 1986, that 1970 something Camaro was cool, but you could probably get it for like $2,000. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they didn't address that. They didn't address how he got that car.
Yeah.
But that was not the nicest car in school. That was not even the coolest car in school, because at that point, those cars hadn't come back around to be expensive or super cool yet. Mm-hmm. It would have been something else. If he was in school in 86 and he had a Buick Grand National, then I'm calling BS on that. But not on the 14-year-old Camaro. That was not the nicest car in school.
Yeah. I wanted to mention one last thing for me, and that was, of course, in the story, Mr. Dean does get through to Nate. He does graduate, and we're assuming that he goes on to, to live a pretty good life. But at the end of the movie, we see Nate at Christmas taking Mr. Dean on a surprise little trip, and they end up going back to the orphanage that Nate was from, where in the movie we find out that they don't really get gifts at Christmas. They get underwear.
Right.
And so Nate didn't know what to do when Mr. Dean had given him all the Christmas gifts. He didn't know how to accept that. And obviously that made an impression on him, because at Christmas he wants to go back and bring gifts to all the children at the orphanage.
Yeah.
And of course, it was just so touching. I'm sure I was crying. And then I looked at the actor who was playing the orphanage director.
Yeah.
And I thought, I wonder what they did right there. And so I watched the credits, and yes, that was the real Nate. So actually Nate Williams, it wasn't his original name. Do we know?
Williams was the foster name that he had taken. I don't think we know what his birth name was.
So he had his given name. The orphanage changed it to Nate, or the foster care changed it to Nate Williams. And then we see on the screen it says that Nate changed his name one last time, and he became Nate Dean.
Yeah.
And so in the credits, the orphanage director is Nate Dean, who was the main character in the story.
Yeah.
So tears, just crying.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
Beautiful.
Beautiful. Yeah.
It was cool. It was a good movie.
Yep. You should go see it.
Yeah. Well, this is the POSTview. Hopefully you've already seen it after we gave you all the spoilers. But,
but they might just be listening to it.
I mean, hey, you were just looking for something good to watch. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you haven't seen it, go see it. It's worth your time.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us. We're David and Hillary.
The movie was Brave the Dark. And that's our POSTview. Want to try it again?
Which part?
Go ahead, say we're David and Hillary.
Yeah, we're David and Hillary.
The movie was Brave the Dark, and that's our POSTview.
We're just starting these.